Hello. Today I will be responding to some questions and requests that I've received and talking about celibacy. I am a Catholic seminary named Kyle, and I am becoming a deacon and committing myself to a life of celibacy in 4 days. Now, before I get into this presentation on celibacy, I just want to clarify that what I'm giving you today is a tiny fraction of what I've received over these going on 5 years of seminary formation. With that said, this presentation will be divided up into 4 parts. First, what? What is celibacy? Then, I'll do a little segue into a discussion between transitional and permanent deacons, something that at least one of you have brought up. Then, I'll talk about the why behind celibacy. Why is this discipline even in place? Finally, I'll get into the how. How is that affecting me? And what am I thinking as I'm approaching ordination? What is celibacy? That is a pretty straightforward question. And celibacy essentially is the giving up of marriage, and by extension, the giving up of sexual relations, because the Catholic Church still teaches that sex belongs in marriage. Hopefully no shockers there. Just to clarify, celibacy for clerics, that is for priests and for deacons, is a discipline of the Church. So in theory, it could change. However, this has been a long-standing tradition, and I really don't see it changing in the near future. Some of you may be aware of other men in your Catholic Church who are called deacons but are married, and that can be kind of confusing. So I think I should describe the difference between permanent deacons and transitional deacons. When I'm ordained in 4 days, I will be ordained as a transitional deacon, meaning that me being a deacon is like a transitional stage between me becoming a priest, which is the end goal of my formation. Permanent deacons, on the other hand, they are ordained to just be deacons for the rest of their life. The way celibacy works between priests, transitional deacons, and permanent deacons is that transitional deacons and priests, they are committed to celibacy from the beginning. Permanent deacons, that's an interesting case. If a man is seeking to become a permanent deacon and he's unmarried, he will take on this promise of celibacy and he cannot be married afterwards. If a man approaches becoming a permanent deacon as a married man, the Church isn't asking him to renounce his wife and kids. So he's still married, but if his wife, tragically, for whatever reason, passes away, normally he is not allowed to be married again. On a related note, someone asked me of what would happen theoretically if I decided not to go on as a transitional deacon. What would happen? Well, we should understand that ordination, it causes a permanent change. It's like being baptized or confirmed. You cannot undo baptism or confirmation. So you cannot undo ordination. So once I'm ordained, I am a deacon forever and nothing can change that. If for whatever reason I just want to stay doing the ministry of a deacon and not go on to priesthood, that's perfectly fine. I could still minister as a deacon for the rest of my life, but the option of being a priest would still be open. However, I have every intention of being ordained a priest as quickly as possible after ordination to the diaconate. Now we move on to the question of why celibacy. Granted, it should be understood that priests and deacons are not the only ones who are asked to be celibate or live a celibate life. Religious brothers, religious sisters, they also have that form of dedication, of giving up marriage. However, I'll just speak about celibacy relating to the priesthood just to keep things streamlined. Based on my formation and from my own reflection on celibacy, I can come up with 4 general categories for reasons why the Church asks men to be celibate for their ordained ministry as deacons and as priests. The first one is scriptural. Basically, if we look into the Gospels and see the life of Jesus, we see that he was celibate. And therefore, those ordained ministers following after the example of Christ choose celibacy, choose the celibate life. More specifically, we could look at other scriptural references specifically about celibacy. For instance, in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, verses 10 through 12, we see Jesus admitting that the call to be celibate is a hard call, and that some people, not everyone gets it, the grace to be able to live out that life. However, he says, if you do have the ability to live a celibate life, do it for the sake of the kingdom of God. The second general cluster of reasons is what I term availability. And that can be broken down into 2 even subsections. Availability, in its essence, is a way of preserving the integrity of marriage, because we believe that the married life is a perfectly good, holy, vocation and it has its own integrity. And so that separating the priesthood, the clerical life, from the married life is a way to ensure the integrity of both forms of life. As I mentioned, this cluster of reasons could be broken down further to two subsections. First is availability of time, the more practical reasons. And that could be, for instance, epitomized by the image of the priest having to say to his son, well, sorry, son, I can't go to your championship Little League team because I have to anoint this woman in the hospital or something like that. If that argument speaks to you, fair enough. Personally, I don't find it incredibly compelling because the brain surgeon could just as well say to his Little League playing son the exact same thing, except saying he has to do brain surgery at the hospital. What is more convincing for me is the understanding that celibacy is about availability on a deeper level, on a level of emotion, on a level of spiritual availability. The best way to describe this is to compare and contrast the married life and the celibate life of priests. As one of my formators at my minor seminary explained to me, the married life can be described as exclusive, while the celibate life as inclusive. Granted, those are very broad categories and broad strokes, so let me clarify. In the married life, I think it's fair to say that we admit that the husband and wife have a reasonable right to expect a unique and exclusive relationship between the two of them. On the other hand, with the celibate life, there is an openness, an inclusive openness to minister to all these people. In a sense, with the married life, love is found and shared in a very unique and special way between the spouses. With the celibate, love is shared and expressed in a unique way that is inclusive and welcoming of as many people as possible. The third point is something I describe as anthropological, and that can be an extension of that second point of availability. Essentially what this says is that based off our human nature, the way God made us, there are two fundamental ways for us to encounter the love of God. One is that we experience it in the married life, and the other through the celibate life. In the married life, the husband and wife, they are encountering the love of God specifically through the person of their spouse. And that is a unique and beautiful thing, and it should be cherished. On the other hand, in the celibate life, the love of God is expressed, experienced, encountered through these inclusive relationships. A fourth reason for why there is celibacy is that the celibate life witnesses to the fact that humans have more to hope for than just sex. In other words, it is based off the belief that God created human beings for himself. To paraphrase the words of St. Augustine, you have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until we can rest in you. As human beings, we are made for infinite love, which only resides in God himself, in heaven. Now we get to the fourth part, the how. How am I reacting to this? How am I even planning to take on this promise of celibacy? Something I probably should say straight away that I take for granted, but you may not entirely realize, is that when we are approaching celibacy, the understanding is that sexuality is in fact a good thing. It is not as if priests and deacons are shunning sex because it's evil and dirty. Anyway, what's my personal take on this? Over the course of my discernment in seminary, I've returned to the question of celibacy over and over again in different contexts with different variations on the same theme. And again, I've come to the conclusion that this life is for me, that God is actually calling me to this life, and that through this life, I am most able to be alive, to love others in a way that's truly liberating for me. Granted, this life is not for everyone, so I don't expect everyone to pick up this life. Yes, over the course of my discernment, I encountered challenges, there were new questions, and I anticipate that since this is a challenging life, that I'll have to reformulate my way of approaching the way of living out celibacy. It's not cut and dry that once the hands are on my head in ordination that I'll be perfectly in the clear. If God continues with his sense of humor and irony, chances are I'll probably encounter the most beautiful person in the world hours after my ordination. Who knows? But just by way of anecdote to highlight, give like a little glimpse of what my process has been, shortly after I arrived here at my major seminary for theology, I was doing some reflection, taking stock of the state of my relationships with friends back home, people I befriended during my undergrad. And I was really coming to terms and realizing that I could really say that I loved a good friend of mine, this young woman who I befriended over the 2 years of minor seminary. And that was an interesting self-revelation, I suppose. And in this culture, the L word is such a bombshell. I suppose like once you say that, once you admit that, something has to happen, or you're just going to pine away in the friend zone forever. But with that, and I was thinking, like, if I truly love her, what does that mean? And if we could go get philosophical with what love is desiring the greatest good for the other person. The greatest good I could give to my friend is what I could give to her as a priest. And that is, and a lot of things made sense at that moment. It makes sound, I guess to some it may sound a bit trite or pithy, but it was a moment I'm trying to express, and there was a lot of consolation and peace surrounding that. And since then, this idea of love, not just for her, but for every other person I encounter, men and women, old, young, rich, poor, you name it, a whole cross-section of humanity, I'm called to love those people. And that kind of makes me excited. That really does. So, yes, I'm taking this promise of celibacy for real in 4 days, and that is not going to be taken back, because I want to be able to orient my life based on that ability to love people inclusively for the glory of God and for their own sake and for their salvation. I'm running out of time. This may be longer than the ordination video, so I'll try to cut things out, but who knows? And chances are I probably missed a lot of things. I try to cram 5 years of reflection and formation in how many minutes this is, so chances are I've missed quite a bit of points and maybe some nuance. So hold me accountable, leave me messages, comments, and I will respond to them, and hopefully we can iron out whatever questions you may have. Also, if you have other questions regarding the seminary process, ordination, becoming a deacon, put those comments below as well, and I will see you tomorrow. Thank you.